Could modern teens handle life without Wi-Fi, hot showers, or fast food when 1930s kids faced dust storms, soup lines, and banks collapsing overnight? This isn't just history. It's survival versus comfort. We'll show you 8 jaw-dropping comparisons, and the final one will stun you. Plus, there's a surprise bonus detail waiting at the end. Could today's teens survive the endless farm chores and housework that 1930s kids did before breakfast? Picture a teenager today rolling out of bed at 10 a.m., scrolling TikTok, grabbing a sugary cereal, and maybe complaining about homework. Now flip that to the 1930s, where a teen's day often began before sunrise, with no alarms except a rooster's crow. By 5 a.m., many kids were already outside, milking cows, slopping pigs, or carrying buckets of water from a well. Statistics paint the picture. In 1930, about 44% of Americans lived in rural areas, and farming families relied heavily on children's labor. Boys often plowed fields behind horses or harvested crops by hand, while girls churned butter, canned food, and washed clothes with scrub boards, work that could take all day. For many, school was secondary to survival. If chores weren't done, there was no food on the table. And this wasn't occasional help. Studies estimate farm children worked an average of 20 to 30 hours a week on top of school duties. Imagine balancing that with long walks to one-room schoolhouses, some trudging 3 to 5 miles each way, often barefoot in summer, or bundled in patched coats during icy winters. Now compare that to modern chores. A 2020 survey revealed that fewer than 60% of American teens regularly do household tasks, and many average less than 5 hours a week. Dishwashers, washing machines, microwaves, and online delivery have erased the hardest jobs from daily life. Teens today are more likely to argue about taking out the trash than rising at dawn to clean animal stalls. But here's the kicker. Those endless chores weren't just busy work. They taught resilience, responsibility, and the reality of survival. Depression-era teens didn't have the option to opt out. Survival meant working together as a family unit every single day. So the question remains, if modern teens were suddenly dropped into a 1930s farmhouse, could they handle back-breaking labor before breakfast? Or would the shock of losing comfort crush them first? Would modern teens last a week without phones, Wi-Fi, or TikTok? When 1930s teens only had radios and letters, imagine this. You take away every phone, Wi-Fi signal, and streaming service from today's teens. No TikTok scrolls, no Instagram likes, no video games. Silence. Most teens today would panic after a few hours. But in the 1930s, silence was normal, and connection looked completely different. Back then, over 60% of rural households didn't even have electricity until the late 1930s, thanks to Roosevelt's New Deal rural electrification program. That meant no glowing screens, no buzzing notifications, no binge watching. Instead, entertainment came from letters, books, neighbors, and the humble radio, which by 1934 sat in over half of American homes. Families gathered around a big wooden box to hear Franklin D. Roosevelt's fireside chats, baseball games, or serialized dramas like The Shadow. For teens, radios were their TikTok. They'd memorize the announcers' voices, laugh at the ads, and imitate lines with friends. But if you missed a show, that was it. No replays, no rewinds. Letters were another lifeline. A simple envelope carried excitement, news from relatives, updates from migrating friends, or notes passed in class. The U.S. Postal Service handled billions of letters each year, making it the social media of its time. Some Depression-era teens even sent pen pal letters across the world. Imagine waiting weeks instead of seconds for a reply. Now let's compare. Today's teens average 7 to 9 hours of screen time daily. They can FaceTime a friend across the world instantly. But ask them to live with just a crackly radio and handwritten letters? Most wouldn't last a weekend, let alone a week. The contrast is huge. For 1930s teens, imagination filled the gaps, reading books aloud, inventing games, or simply talking on the porch. For modern teens, the idea of being bored feels unbearable. But boredom was the canvas Depression era kids painted resilience on. If we yanked the Wi-Fi for 7 days and handed teens only a letter pad and an old radio, who would adapt faster, the digital generation or the Depression survivors? Could today's teens wake up at dawn for field labor or factory shifts, like Depression-era teens did to feed their families? Picture this. It's 5 a.m. in 1932. The rooster crows, not your iPhone alarm. Instead of checking notifications, you're pulling on worn boots and heading outside to pick cotton, shovel coal, or feed livestock before the sun is even up. For millions of Depression-era teens, this wasn't helping out. It was survival. By the early 1930s, unemployment for adults hit 25% nationwide, leaving families desperate for extra income. That's where teens stepped in. According to U.S. Census data, about 1 in 5 teenagers worked in some form of wage labor, often backbreaking jobs in fields, mines, or factories. A study from 1935 showed nearly 200,000 children under 15 were working in agriculture alone, their small hands picking crops faster than machines of the time. Take the story of the Okie migrants. Families fleeing the Dust Bowl often piled into jalopies and drove west to California. Teens as young as 13 would rise at dawn to pick lettuce or cotton for pennies a day. John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath was an exaggeration. It was real life for thousands. One farm worker teen later recalled, "We worked till our fingers bled. If we stopped, we didn't eat." Factories were no easier. Textile mills, shoe plants, and canneries hired teens because they could be paid less. Shifts could stretch 10 to 12 hours, 6 days a week. Imagine modern teens who average about 20 hours a week in part-time jobs like retail or food service, suddenly asked to double or triple that, doing heavy labor with no breaks or labor protections. And remember, there was no quitting just because it was hard. Teens' wages kept lights on, put food on tables, and sometimes made the difference between keeping a house or losing it to foreclosure. So here's the kicker. Could today's teens, used to after-school jobs at coffee shops, survive the 1930s grind of dawn to dusk labor day after day, knowing their family's survival depended on every dollar? Or would the weight of responsibility prove too much? Would modern teens crumble living with one pair of shoes and patched clothes, while 1930s teens stretched every item for years? Close your eyes and imagine opening your closet. Racks of shirts, hoodies, sneakers stacked in pairs, maybe some you hardly ever wear. Now picture a Depression-era teen's closet. One pair of shoes, a few hand-me-down outfits, and a coat patched so many times it barely held together. That was daily life in the 1930s. During the Great Depression, money for clothes was scarce. Families spent almost everything on food and shelter, leaving little for extras. Government studies found that clothing consumption dropped by nearly 25% between 1929 and 1933. Many teens wore hand-me-downs from siblings, and when those wore out, mothers became experts with needle and thread. Flour sacks, with their colorful patterns, were famously repurposed into dresses and shirts. By 1935, flour companies even began printing sacks with floral designs because so many families used them for clothing. Shoes were treasured possessions. A pair could last years, not months. Teens often wore the same pair to school, church, and work. When they wore thin, cardboard was slipped inside to cover holes, and soles were patched again and again. In some rural schools, kids walked miles barefoot during summer just to preserve their shoes for winter. Compare that to today. U.S. teens now spend an average of $2,150 a year on fashion, with sneakers like Jordans or Yeezys costing hundreds. Closet clutter has replaced Depression-era scarcity. Where a 1930s teen might own 2 or 3 outfits total, today's teens often rotate through dozens. But here's the deeper point. Scarcity shaped resilience. Those 1930s teens learned to make do, take pride in resourcefulness, and value what they had. Modern teens, surrounded by abundance, may crumble if forced to live with so little. Could they handle wearing the same patched shirt all week without complaint? Or would the pressure to fit in prove overwhelming? So the question lingers. If today's fashion-driven teens were suddenly dropped into the 1930s, would they adapt to extreme minimalism? Or would the loss of style and status break them long before the hunger did? Could today's teens handle unquestioned family duty? When 1930s teens worked without arguing because survival depended on it. Think about how often teens today debate chores. Why me? Or, I'll do it later. Now rewind to the 1930s, where asking why wasn't an option. Survival wasn't up for discussion. If your father said, plow the field, or your mother asked, watch the younger kids, you did it. Not tomorrow, not later, now. Why? Because Depression-era families leaned on every member, young or old. Census records show that by 1940, nearly 1 out of every 5 children between ages 10 and 15 was employed in some way, working farms, delivering papers, shining shoes, or caring for siblings while parents sought work. In rural areas, the numbers were even higher. Take the story of 14-year-old Pauline Kael, later a famous film critic. In the mid-1930s, she worked alongside her siblings on her family's chicken farm in Petaluma, California, gathering eggs and cleaning coops before and after school. Her teenage years weren't about dances or dating. They were about duty, or consider the Little Mothers Leagues in cities like New York, where teen girls were trained to care for infants so their mothers could work. It wasn't about babysitting money. It was about family survival. Contrast that with modern expectations. Today, only about 20% of teens work during the school year, and most jobs are part-time retail or food service roles, often chosen for pocket money, not family need. Household duties are shared or argued over. Independence, personal choice, and self-expression dominate the modern teen identity. But in the 1930s, self wasn't the priority. Family came first, always. Teens sacrificed education, dreams, even health to ensure parents and younger siblings got through each day. A missed chore could mean no meal, no roof, no future. So here's the burning question. If modern teens used to negotiating freedom and independence, were dropped into a 1930s household where orders weren't suggestions but survival codes. Could they carry the load without question? Or would rebellion win out against responsibility? Would modern teens trade, say, stress for the 1930s reality of quitting school to pick crops or support younger siblings? Picture today's teens stressing about SAT prep, AP classes, and college essays. Now imagine the 1930s, where the real stress wasn't test scores. It was deciding whether you could even stay in school at all. For many Depression-era teens, education ended not with graduation caps, but with work boots. In 1930, the U.S. high school graduation rate was only 29%. That meant fewer than 1 in 3 teens finished. Why? Families needed hands more than diplomas. Boys were sent to fields, factories, or repair shops. Girls often cared for younger siblings or took in laundry. During the worst years, up to 40% of rural teens left school early to help put food on the table. Take the Dust Bowl states. In Oklahoma and Kansas, teens left classrooms en masse to join their families on desperate treks west. Some picked cotton in California for as little as $1.50 a day. In New York City, dropout rates soared too. Urban teens took messenger jobs, worked in garment factories, or shined shoes to support struggling households. Compare that to today. Roughly 90% of U.S. teens finish high school, and about 66% go on to college. Instead of worrying about whether they'll have time for school at all, modern teens worry about GPA competition, college debt, and whether they'll land a dream job after graduation. Stress is real, but very different. One haunting letter from a teen in 1933 captures the divide. "I love learning, but my brothers are hungry. School will wait, hunger will not." That kind of choice would shock most teens today. So here's the big question. If we swapped SAT flashcards for a cotton sack, or replaced homework with babysitting siblings all day, how many modern teens could stay strong? Would they see the sacrifice as strength, or buckle under the weight of family need? Could today's teens live without credit cards, loans, or cash apps? When 1930s teens learned to survive. With nothing but coins and barter, imagine telling a teen today, no Venmo, no Cash App, no debit card, not even an ATM panic, right? But in the 1930s, that was life. Teens and families lived in a world of hard cash, coins, and sometimes no money at all. Survival meant barter, favors, and scraping by. During the Great Depression, banks collapsed at record pace. 9,000 banks failed between 1930 and 1933, wiping out savings. Families who thought they were secure woke up broke overnight. With credit systems nearly non-existent, people turned to creative ways of getting by. Farmers might trade eggs for flour or a haircut for a sack of potatoes. In towns, stores ran tabs, but only for those they trusted. Neighbors vouched for one another's honesty. For teens, money was scarce. A shoe shine could earn 5 cents. Selling newspapers brought in a dime. And farm kids sometimes earned less than $1 a day picking crops. Every penny mattered. Imagine the weight of holding a single nickel, knowing it could buy bread for your siblings. Now compare that to today. Teens swipe cards without thinking. Surveys show 63% of U.S. teens use mobile payment apps, and the average teen spends nearly $2,150 a year on fashion and food alone. Credit and debt are normal. Many teens expect allowance or fun money. Depression-era teens? They expected nothing and often gave what little they earned to their parents. One 1932 diary entry from a 15-year-old in Illinois reads, "Mama says we must eat beans again. I gave her my nickel from shining shoes. She cried that tiny sacrifice was monumental." So here's the challenge. If we stripped away credit cards, digital wallets, and fast access to money, could modern teens survive in a cash-only world where barter ruled and coins decided dinner? Or would the loss of convenience collapse their confidence faster than hunger ever could? Who proves tougher when survival is on the line? Depression era, teens hardened by scarcity, or digital teens shaped by constant connection. So who really wins this brutal comparison? 1930s, Depression era teens, or today's digital generation? Let's stack the evidence. Depression teens face 25% unemployment, 9,000 bank failures, and a dust bowl that displaced 2.5 million people. Nearly 500,000 families lost their farms, and 1 in 5 teens worked full-time jobs to keep their families afloat. Survival meant grit, hauling water, picking crops, or sewing clothes from flour sacks. They learned to stretch every penny and every meal. Hardship was their normal. Now look at today's teens. They're connected 24/7, balancing academics, part-time work, sports, and social lives, while navigating mental health struggles like anxiety and depression. A 2023 CDC report found 57% of teen girls and 29% of teen boys reported persistent sadness, numbers higher than ever before. Instead of dust storms, they face cyberbullying, climate anxiety, and crushing student debt waiting around the corner. Different storms, but storms all the same. Which group was tougher? Depression-era teens had raw survival skills. They knew how to milk cows, fix shoes, barter goods, and endure endless work without complaint. But digital teens have resilience of a new kind, adapting to rapid technology shifts, managing constant comparison online, and surviving in a world where privacy has all but vanished. Still, ask yourself, if you swapped worlds, who would last longer? Could a TikTok generation teen walk barefoot 5 miles to a one-room schoolhouse, then pick beans until sunset? Could a 1930s teen survive today without being overwhelmed by social media pressure or the stress of college debt? Here's the sobering truth. Both generations are strong, but in different ways. The 1930s built toughness through physical survival. Today builds toughness through mental survival. The real question isn't who is tougher. It's whether either group could handle the other's battles. And maybe, just maybe, the answer would surprise us all. Thanks for watching. If you loved this brutal but fascinating comparison, smash that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and hit subscribe for more amazing history meets modern life stories. Don't miss our next mind-blowing video.